All right, and we're live. So for everyone who doesn't already know, this is Matthew Charnay. He's with Jewish Life, and he's going to be our guest speaker today for talking about Holocaust Remembrance Day, and in particular, more of anti-Semitism as well. So I was just wanting to start off and asking, Matt, could you what is anti-Semitism, and like what does that commonly like look like, just like throughout like history and in like America, I guess.
Great question. So let me. The very quick explanation is like what is anti-Semitism is hatred towards Jews. There's some very specific and very more long-winded language than that we can really dive into. But basically, it is an unearned bias towards the Jewish people. And now what that looks like in American culture and what it kind of has grown into is an extremely dense and really complicated topic. But I do want to actually pull up the working definition of anti-Semitism, and this goes actually very well with, since yesterday was International Holocaust Remembrance Day, this definition comes from the Alliance for Holocaust Remembrance. And I think this definition is a pretty good all-encompassing definition of anti-Semitism that a lot of Jews feel very comfortable with.
Yeah.
And that definition is this. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Radical or physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jews or non-Jewish individuals and their property, towards Jewish community, institutions, and religious facilities, which is a little more legalistic, but a little more encompassing as far as just hatred towards Jews. It doesn't just manifest as like, I have a feeling inside of my head, and so therefore there are physical acts of anti-Semitism, there are verbal acts of anti-Semitism, that it is not just a feeling that one has. It's like it is more than that. It actually moves on to like something that an action that is done towards someone, and not necessarily just towards a Jewish person, but towards something that symbolizes Jews or a person who works with a Jewish community. So like it's a very vast but very serious situation. So I know that's kind of a lot of word salad at once to answer one definition, but it's also difficult to pin down because some people accept that definition freely, some people resist that definition, and some people think, well, that I have defined what I think is a Jewish institution or Jewish organization or not, and so therefore like my actions do not mean it's anti-Semitic because I don't identify like this entity as Jewish. So it gets very difficult, and I think I'm making it more confusing than I am more clear as I talk. So
That's okay.
more clarification questions.
No, the thing that I like how you talk. It's like a very complex question because I remember this came up again recently. The topic of anti-Semitism in America recently with like the Capitol, and I remember a lot of people saying that there's a lot of anti-Semitic like rhetoric and symbols that are happening at the Capitol, and it was like a worrying symbol. And I wanted to know like your opinion on that of like what was like the things that you like saw.
So anti-Semitism is kind of this canary in a coal mine as far as bias and hatred. The Jewish community represents maybe 2% of the population in America, but we see some strong anti-Semitism especially when we're looking at things like what happened at the Capitol a couple of weeks ago. And when I say canary in a coal mine, it's more of the idea that when we're seeing the flare-up of anti-Semitism again, it's very quickly on the heels of lots of other kinds of hatred and bigotry. Anti-Semitism never fully goes away. I mean, Jews have been in existence for thousands of years, and we've seen anti-Semitism for literally thousands of years now. And so the idea that anti-Semitism just kind of like shifts and moves from place and culture to culture with Jewish population is a very common thing for us as Jews to see. But seeing it so blatant, seeing it's not hidden anymore. There's no shame involved in holding these ideologies. It is very public. People are proud to wear it on their shirts now. People are proud to have symbols that says 6 million wasn't enough on their shirt, or to say, I'm a counselor at Camp Auschwitz. And the acceptability of this anti-Semitism is what makes it even more scary, devastating,
Mm-hmm.
that they're not worried that we know who they are anymore. They're not hiding their faces. They're very proud of these beliefs and very staunch and very vocal about how they're feeling about minority communities. And so when we see anti-Semitism starting to spark up again, we're seeing lots of other hatred and lots of other forms of bigotry and bias spark up. As we can see, like the idea that white supremacy, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, they're all just closely tied in. And unfortunately, they all kind of track each other as far as groups that identify. The Venn diagram slowly becomes not just a big circle. Like the diagram gets smaller and smaller as we kind of see. So it's very difficult. And especially as someone in the Jewish community who's still trying, like we're all still reflecting on the gravity of that situation and how serious it actually was.
Mm-hmm.
And then like for the Jewish community, we have like another level of seriousness involved where like the blatant anti-Semitism is not the main concern for most people. It's, you know, there's a coup attempt going on by people, by insurrectionists. And on top of that, they're filled with hate for certain groups. And now all of these minority groups are kind of trying to deal with what that means on top of what this other act was. What I've been saying to people recently is it's very hard to understand like a historical moment when we're literally living it. That it takes sometimes months and years of reflection to actually figure out like what is the gravity of the thing we just saw happen. And I feel like that the ripples will be felt for a very long time of what just occurred, and unpacking where this hate comes from, where these feelings bubble up from, and what misinformation is given to whom to kind of create this false narrative of power, privilege, oppression.
Mm-hmm. I like that you mentioned how it'll take a lot of time for us to see the ramifications of this. Just from literally my history class a few weeks ago, my history professor, Professor Lisa, she was explaining to us how you won't ever see an historian write an event till 20 years after it's happened, because it takes that long just to see the after effects of it.
Yeah. No, it's the word surreal is an interesting word, and to live through an actual surreal moment is intense.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that needs proper reflection, dialogue, discussion. I think like hats off to DePaul. They are very good at making sure students have space and practice on reflection. Because I think like, there's a good chunk of society that's just trying to kind of live a normal life after what just occurred. And I think DePaul, actually, we kind of have it in our head of like, no, this is a moment for like, we need to stop, reflect, discuss, ask each other how we're feeling, because like just moving into the next phase of whatever this is very difficult without proper reflection. So like the Jewish community is getting better at it. It's you know, probably a very big part of our culture and our theological identity is reflecting on past events. Most of our holidays are reflecting on past things that have happened, good or bad. And so like we're just kind of adding this into that reflection time. And yeah, I don't know. It's so weird where to me, the anti-Semitism piece is a very crucial part of what just happened. But in very common anti-Semitic form, I don't really hear it being talked about as in like the zeitgeist of what's going on and kind of the general commotion about the event. It's something that we're kind of left holding afterwards, which unfortunately anti-Semitism feels like that very often, that it might be a flash in the pan as far as a concern for the larger community, but anti-Semitism seems to be so regularly occurring that it is just accepted as, you know, something that happens in life. Sometimes people hate Jews, you know, and that's just how it is. And unfortunately, like we accidentally put American mindset there of like, this happens so often. What are we to do? Right? Like how would we ever, or you're never going to change these people's minds. And so we just kind of slip anti-Semitism over to the side of like, well, not my problem, and we have other problems to deal with. So, you know, let's go ahead and take care of the big ones. So it's, and unfortunately part of the like trope of anti-Semitism is Jews are always the ones complaining about anti-Semitism. And like the bringing up of anti-Semitism by Jewish personality is like doubled down inside anti-Semitism. All they ever do is talk about anti-Semitism. Oh, they're always bringing up anti-Semitism because the feeling is like, well, if we don't, who will? And there was a really big anti-Semitic incident that just happened inside of another big incident. So whose responsibility is it to call that out? And is it the community who's victimized? Is it the larger community who waits for whom to talk first? It's very fraught.
Yeah. I remember how you mentioned DePaul being very good with dealing with making spaces to have like conversations and for reflection. And I want to talk about like how do you have you like seen where have you seen like anti-Semitism at DePaul, and where have you like seen like DePaul? How do you you seen like DePaul, I guess, challenge that or like tackle at the problem of anti-Semitism at DePaul?
At DePaul, interesting. Like being the Jewish coordinator for 10 years, I'm very happy to say that like I cannot outwardly report extreme acts of anti-Semitism at DePaul. Most of the things that I encounter usually revolve around political ideology, Middle East politics, and ignorance towards, and I don't mean ignorance in a negative way, but just kind of lack of understanding about Jewish identity and those topics of not all Jews feel the same way about political identities in the Middle East or hear certain words the same way. Like just because the word is the identifier or like the name of a country does not necessarily that word means the same thing to everyone else who hears it. And so a lot of my time at DePaul and what I would consider like combating anti-Semitism is a lot of explanation and education to mostly people who just didn't know, not because they're holding deep-seated hatred towards Jews and they really want to get Jews out of here. It's more of like anti-Semitism can come from just blatant ignorance of a topic. I didn't know that term was offensive. I didn't know that this thing would be rude to another population. And that's where like the rule of ouch and educate at DePaul, and I know it exists outside of DePaul, but using that ground rule and dialogue is such an easy, good, but really important tool to leave with. That when you have that kind of tool in your toolbox, I don't want to overuse the word tool too much, but like it's very easy for people outside of DePaul or the general population to just never ask, to never bring up anything uncomfortable, to never have that moment of self-reflection. But I feel like DePaul is good at like empowering not just the students, but the staff, the faculty, the community to like stop and say like, well, you know, what must be done here? Right? Is this okay? What's happening? I should ask if this is okay, or maybe I should ask for clarification on this. Or I know that what just was said was offensive. This person might not. And so to be empowered to just be that person in the conversation, in your friend group, in your business group, in your cohort, to be the person that stands up and says, hey, you know, we're using this term and I don't know if you know what it means, or here's how I know what that term means. Let's stop using that term. Or why don't we explore something else that we can use? Or where did you hear this? And let's talk a little bit more about it. But to be able to just put yourself in that place where it's okay to be the person that says, no, I don't really do that. I don't really hang out with people that use that kind of language, that offer those kinds of suggestions towards people or hold those identities and views. Because I think it's very common for most people to just kind of accept and move through life. But I really hope that Paul has empowered all of us to take that moment of reflection and to be that voice, to be that changing voice or that little beacon of justice. And I'm not saying that you're going to change the world by just interrupting a conversation, but interrupt the conversation, right? Like, why not? Be the person that says, hey, that's not cool. Don't tell that joke. It really starts with that. It really does. So I hope that's my prayer is that's what DePaul is giving, not just the students, like I said, but everyone at DePaul, that kind of pause and thought for justice.
So when we're looking at that, like, what can we do for anti-Semitism? Do you feel it's like that Vincentian value, like what must be done, like really thinking in that way?
Exactly. Well, I don't think if you're not Jewish, it doesn't probably affect your world or your day-to-day and your worldview.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that when those things don't pop into your everyday, it's hard to stop and ask that question to yourself. What must be done about this? Because that question is asked all the time. But like my quick thing to everybody, and not just anti-Semitism, but to all forms of injustice, hatred, supremacy, and bigotry, is educate yourself. Right? Take 1 second, 1 minute to read the article, not just skim. Like, and I'm almost more talking to myself out loud of like, just because you read the title of an article does not mean you got the whole article. Read the article. And then the next thing is ask someone else. Like, ask the Jewish person you know how they feel about what happened, or ask for clarification on the issue. Take that one extra step to be the informed person in your group. Like, read, engage with art from people that are outside your cultural group, and like, it doesn't have to be read educational topics about Judaism, but read things by Jews, watch art by Jews, and same thing with people of color or LGBTQ communities. Like, that's how you can break out of your own mold and get a little bit more in tune with the culture outside of yours, is just starting to engage with the art that's accessible to you, and then get into academics if that's your thing. Of course, go read all of the, just thousands and thousands of books about Jewish philosophy or history or theology. But at the same time, watch some Mel Brooks and learn a little bit. Like, just engage with the popular culture that is, and don't be afraid to ask questions. It's kind of the very, very quick. And then to jump back to the conversation I just had, be the person that does not accept casual hatred. Tell your friends you don't want to hear Jewish jokes. Tell your friends you don't like racist humor. Just say, no, that wasn't funny. Like, be that voice in your friend group, in your family. Be the person around the table that says that's not true to your uncle or your aunt or whoever. Not to pejoritize uncles, but you know what I mean. That would be my very quick, like, what do we do about anti-Semitism? Because just like all forms of hatred, it gets so ingrained in common forms of speech that we just accept it and move on. And that would be my quick, what do we do?
Well, I wanted to leave it off if you had any final points or thoughts that you wanted to share before we wrap it up here.
I really appreciate you calling me in, asking me questions. It's a difficult topic to discuss, and I know it makes lots of people feel uncomfortable, and it does feel like a very big issue. I know, and we're all thinking about these really big issues right now, right? How do we stop anti-Semitism? How do we dismantle white supremacy? How do we, bring up the voices of those marginalized communities? There's lots of very important books in Judaism, the Torah, the Mishnah, the Talmud. Inside the Talmud, there's a quote that says, just because the task feels so big it's unaccomplishable does not excuse you from the work. Even though it feels so big that you alone will never change that problem, it does not excuse you from trying the work. And even if you make a small baby step in one direction, that's progress. Like, that is what we are looking for. It starts on that personal level. It starts with interpersonal communication, and that's kind of where it goes from there. And also today is Tu B'Shvat, which is like the birthday of all the trees in the world. And we could get into a million different discussions about why there's a tree birthday and what that means for ancient Judaism and things. But there's a special prayer we say when we reach a special occasion like this. And since you and I have never been in a StreamYard before having this conversation, and it's a brand new day and a holiday, I offer this quick prayer as kind of a closeout for us. I say the Shechianu. It's Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu la'azman hazeh. Blessed are you, Creator, Lord of everything, who brings us life, sustains us, and allows us to reach this happy moment right here. Amen. Thank you so much.
Of course. I see that we have a comment from Kayla. She's asking if there are any big no-nos to avoid when bringing up anti-Semitism. Would you have anything that you'd say on that? having a hard time telling when it's an appropriate time or inappropriate to like bring up the topic.
Interesting. Ooh, well, I'd like to talk to Kayla about what she's feeling there. But I mean, I go with the gut, and if it feels like this is the absolute wrong time for an apparent reason, forgo the conversation. But challenge is when we grow. Like we don't grow without challenge, and so sometimes having that difficult conversation in the moment might feel wrong, but the challenge is, again, sometimes what makes people come out of their shell, makes them think a little differently, and makes them kind of grow. So I don't want to say never have a challenging moment or never, ever, ever interrupt if it feels uncomfortable at all. But at the same time, I think we can kind of gauge when a proper social situation arises. Or do you know this person? Do you not know this person? But I wouldn't say there's like huge no-nos of like, you should never, ever, ever ask a Jewish person about blah, blah, blah. Like, what I would say is the same thing I would say for any minority community is don't make assumptions. Don't assume that you know something about this person because of their faith identity or because their skin color or something like that. That's the big no-no. That, oh, all Jews think blah, 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 blah. That's just as terrible to say all people of color think blah, 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 blah. Like you don't know all Jews or all people of color or all LGBTQ folks. So like that would be my big no-no question. Is like, just don't assume that you know their perspective. Ask their perspective first. Because that's, unfortunately, a lot of what we run into is an assumption, especially, again, about political ideology and Jews.
All right. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Matt, for coming on today and spending the time. I know you're really busy with the baby and everything. I'm happy she didn't end up crying while we were having the interview, but I just want to thank you for coming on. It's been great hearing from you, and I hope to be able to hear from you again as well.
Absolutely. If anyone has any questions about Judaism, anti-Semitism, if you're facing anything that feels weird on campus, if a professor, a staff member, if something like that raises, and this is for Jews and non-Jews alike, if someone says something that kind of a flag goes up in your head, and you think, whoa, 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 is that okay to say? Come talk. Come talk to me. I always say it as like the rule of your headlights, right? Like if you think to yourself, should I turn on my headlights? You should turn on your headlights. If you think to yourself, ooh, was that anti-Semitism? You should come talk. Like you should come talk to the Jewish Life Coordinator. If you think, ooh, was that Islamophobic? You should come talk to the Muslim chaplain. You think, ooh, was that just racist? You should come talk to somebody in the cultural center. You should come talk to us in religious diversity. That is exactly what we're here for, advocating for students, staff, and faculty of the university. So that would be my quick final send-off.
Cool. All right. Just want to thank everyone for viewing, and yeah, be ready for us when we're next going.
Shalom, everyone.